Mary was 52 years old, and like so many others, she had spent more than a decade battling type 2 diabetes. Her doctors had tried everything the conventional way, pills first, then stronger medications, eventually multiple insulin injections each day. Every year the doses went up, yet her blood sugars stayed high, her weight crept upward, and her energy levels sank lower. She followed the advice she was given: eat small, frequent meals, avoid fat, count calories. And still she got worse. By the time she came to see me, she felt defeated. It seemed as though diabetes was a life sentence. But something changed when she tried a different approach. Instead of adding more medications or more meals, we did the opposite. She began practicing intermittent fasting, starting simply by skipping breakfast, giving her body a longer break between meals. Within weeks, the results were striking. She lost weight without counting calories. Her daily insulin needs began to shrink. Within months, her A1C dropped, her energy returned, and for the first time in years, she felt hopeful. What made the difference wasn't another drug or some complicated diet plan. It was addressing the real problem: insulin. When insulin levels stay high all the time, the body is locked in storage mode. Fat is trapped, blood sugar rises, and energy becomes inaccessible. By lowering insulin through fasting, Mary's body could finally unlock its stored energy. She was no longer fighting biology. She was working with it. This is not a new discovery. Ancient traditions have used fasting for centuries as a natural healing tool. What modern science has shown us is why it works. Fasting lowers insulin, allowing the body to reverse the process that drives obesity and type 2 diabetes. It's a simple, powerful shift with life-changing results. Insulin is one of the most important hormones in the human body, and yet, for many people struggling with weight and type 2 diabetes, its role is often misunderstood. Most people think of insulin simply as the blood sugar hormone, but in truth, it is far more than that. Insulin's primary job is to act as a storage signal. Whenever you eat, especially rich in carbohydrates, your blood sugar rises. In response, your pancreas releases insulin. This hormone tells your body, stop burning fuel, start storing it. It is the biochemical equivalent of flipping a switch from burn to store. One way to picture this is to imagine your body as a car with two gas tanks. The first tank is the food you've just eaten, the sugar and calories that are circulating in your bloodstream. The second tank is your body's stored energy, your fat reserves. The design is brilliant. When food is plentiful, insulin rises and pushes energy into storage. When food is scarce, insulin falls and the body naturally switches to burning the stored fuel. That is how humans have survived through thousands of years of feast and famine. But here's the catch: if insulin never drops, you never gain access to that second tank. Now think of what happens in modern life. We are told to eat 6 times a day, to snack between meals, to never let ourselves feel hungry. Every time food enters the system, insulin rises. Over time, insulin stops behaving like a quick spike and turns into a constant flood. The body is stuck in storage mode all the time. This means fat remains locked away and the body is forced to rely on the immediate sugar in the bloodstream. When that sugar dips, you feel tired, cranky, and hungry again. The solution most people reach for is another snack, which only pushes insulin higher, and the cycle continues. The overflowing gas tank metaphor helps make this clearer. Imagine filling your car with gas. At first, the tank accepts the fuel, no problem. But if you never let it run low and you keep filling it every few hours, eventually the gas tank is full. What happens then? The fuel spills over, flooding where it shouldn't go. This is exactly what chronically high insulin does. Your body tries to push sugar into the cells, but they're already full. The excess spills into the bloodstream, raising blood sugar. Over years, this persistent overflow becomes type 2 diabetes. High insulin also explains why so many people find it almost impossible to lose weight by cutting calories alone. You can eat less, but if insulin levels remain elevated, your body still won't unlock the stored fat. It's like having thousands of dollars locked away in a bank account, but being told you can only spend what's in your pocket. Even if you're starving, the fat remains off limits because insulin is sending the wrong signal. This is why type 2 diabetes is not just a disease of high blood sugar, but a disease of too much insulin. Medications that add more insulin may lower blood sugar temporarily, but they push the body deeper into storage mode, causing more weight gain and worsening insulin resistance over time. It's treating the symptom, not the root cause. The simple but powerful truth is this: if insulin is the hormone that locks fat away, then lowering insulin is the key to unlocking it. That's where intermittent fasting becomes such an effective tool. Instead of constantly adding more fuel to the tank, you give your body time to burn through what it already has. When insulin falls, fat burning resumes naturally. Suddenly, the second gas tank, the one filled with stored energy, is available again. Energy improves, weight comes off, and blood sugars stabilize. Understanding insulin in this way reshapes the entire conversation about weight loss and diabetes. It's not about willpower, discipline, or eating less and moving more. It's about hormones. When insulin stays chronically high, the body is trapped in storage mode. When insulin comes down, the body's natural balance is restored. It's a shift from fighting biology to working with it, and that changes everything. For decades, the standard medical approach to type 2 diabetes has been to chase blood sugar numbers. When blood sugars rise, the prescription is straightforward: medications to push those numbers down. At first, it may be metformin or another pill. As the disease progresses, more pills are added. Eventually, insulin injections become the mainstay of treatment. On the surface, this seems logical. If the body isn't producing enough insulin or isn't using it well, why not give more? And for a while, the numbers improve. Blood sugars fall, doctors are satisfied, and patients are told their diabetes is under control. But beneath those numbers, something very different is happening. Adding more insulin doesn't fix the underlying problem. Type 2 diabetes is not caused by a lack of insulin. In fact, most patients already have too much insulin. Their bodies have become resistant to it, like a key that no longer opens the lock. Flooding the system with even more insulin may force sugar into the cells for the short term, but it worsens the fundamental issue: insulin resistance. Here's where the trap lies. Insulin is the hormone of storage. The more insulin circulating in the body, the more fat gets locked away. The body shifts into permanent storage mode, unable to burn its own energy. Patients often notice that as soon as they start insulin injections, their weight begins to climb. The scale creeps upward, sometimes by 10, 20, even 30 pounds. This weight gain is not an accident. It's the direct effect of higher insulin levels. And that extra weight only makes insulin resistance worse, which then leads to higher doses of insulin. The cycle is vicious. Imagine it this way: if your house is overflowing with clutter, and the solution is to bring in more boxes to stuff things into, you may temporarily make the living room look cleaner. But the underlying problem, the clutter, only grows. Eventually, every room is filled and there's no space left to move. That is exactly what happens when more and more insulin is added. Blood sugars may look better on paper, but the root problem, the metabolic clutter of too much insulin and too much energy, only gets worse. This explains why so many patients, even those who are diligent with their medications, never actually reverse their diabetes. They may be told they're managing the disease, but they are not curing it. Their need for medication escalates over time. Their waistline expands, and complications, kidney disease, nerve damage, heart problems continue to advance. It feels like running faster and faster on a treadmill, expending more effort but going nowhere. Fasting, on the other hand, takes a radically different approach because it targets the real problem: excess insulin. By extending the time between meals, the body finally has a chance to lower insulin levels. When insulin falls, the body can begin burning its stored energy. Fat is released, blood sugars normalize, and insulin resistance improves rather than worsens. Instead of trapping energy inside the fat cells, fasting opens the locks and lets that energy flow. Patients often notice they lose weight naturally, their medication requirements shrink, and many are even able to stop insulin altogether. This is the critical difference between conventional care and a fasting approach. Conventional care is about symptom management. It focuses on controlling blood sugar with drugs, even if it means fueling the very process that caused the disease in the first place. Fasting, however, is about root cause reversal. It removes the constant flood of insulin, restores metabolic flexibility, and gives the body a chance to heal. The proof lies in patient stories. Over and over, people who have struggled for years on multiple medications suddenly see dramatic improvements when they try fasting. Blood sugars drop within weeks, weight begins to melt away, and energy levels rise. The very thing they were told was progressive and irreversible begins to move backward. This isn't magic, it's physiology. Lower insulin, and the body naturally returns to balance. The tragedy is that so many people remain stuck in the insulin trap because they are never told there's another way. They believe their disease will only get worse, and the best they can do is manage it with ever-increasing doses of medication. But when patients understand that type 2 diabetes is fundamentally a disease of too much insulin, the solution becomes clear. You don't fix it by adding more, you fix it by giving the body the chance to lower insulin, unlock stored energy, and heal itself. That's what fasting offers, and that is why it succeeds where conventional treatment so often fails. When most people hear the word fasting, they imagine deprivation or starvation. But fasting is not about running on empty. It is about teaching the body to use the fuel it already has stored. To understand why fasting works, it helps to look closely at what happens step by step inside the body when you stop eating for a period of time. Far from being dangerous or unnatural, this process is deeply ingrained in human physiology. It is the way our bodies were designed to function. The first stage begins shortly after a meal. Food is digested, broken down into glucose, and absorbed into the bloodstream. Insulin rises, signaling the body to store some of that glucose as glycogen in the liver and muscles, and the rest as fat. For several hours, the body runs on the food just consumed. Once that fuel is used up, insulin begins to drop. The second stage kicks in as the body turns to glycogen, the short-term storage form of glucose in the liver. Think of glycogen as the refrigerator in your kitchen. Easy to access, always stocked with a small supply. For the first 12 to 24 hours of fasting, your body runs primarily on glycogen. This is why early fasting feels surprisingly easy. The body is simply using up the leftovers from your last meals. As glycogen stores begin to decline, insulin continues to fall. This is key because lower insulin is the signal that unlocks the next stage. The third stage is gluconeogenesis, which literally means making new glucose. The body is smart. It knows that certain tissues, like red blood cells and parts of the brain, require glucose to function. Instead of panicking, the body calmly produces what it needs. It converts amino acids and glycerol into glucose, ensuring that essential functions continue. At this point, your body is no longer entirely dependent on glycogen or the food you've eaten. It is learning to shift fuel sources. The fourth stage is where fasting becomes truly powerful fat burning. Once glycogen stores are low and insulin has dropped significantly, the body begins tapping into its long-term pantry, its fat reserves. Imagine your kitchen again. The refrigerator is for short-term storage, but the freezer and pantry are stocked with food for the long haul. When the fridge is empty, you don't starve. You simply walk over to the pantry and use what you've already put away. That's exactly how fasting works. Your fat is the pantry, filled with tens of thousands of calories of stored energy, more than enough to fuel the body for days or even weeks. As fat is broken down, it produces ketones, an alternative fuel that many organs, including the brain, can use efficiently. Far from causing weakness or confusion, ketones often lead to sharper mental clarity and improved energy. This is why people practicing intermittent fasting frequently report feeling more alert rather than sluggish. The body is no longer dependent on the constant drip of external calories. It is running smoothly on its own reserves. Decades of physiology studies confirm that these stages of fasting are safe, natural, and effective. Humans have evolved with this system precisely because food has not always been available on demand. Our ancestors thrived in cycles of feast and famine. Fasting was not a hardship, it was built into survival. Modern life, with its constant snacking and around-the-clock eating, has disrupted this rhythm. Instead of allowing insulin to fall and fat to be used, we keep the body stuck in the fed state, locked out of the pantry. When fasting is reintroduced, the system begins working as intended. Insulin levels drop, glycogen is burned, fat stores open up, energy becomes accessible. Instead of crashing when a meal is missed, the body glides into its alternate fuel system. This is why people who fast regularly often find hunger becomes less overwhelming. The body is no longer crying out for immediate fuel because it is comfortably drawing on the vast reserves already stored. Understanding fasting this way removes the fear. It is not about starving the body, but about restoring balance. It is a controlled, natural process that allows insulin to reset and energy to flow. The fridge, the freezer, and the pantry are all part of the same kitchen. The problem in modern times is that we never give the fridge a chance to empty. Fasting simply opens the door to the pantry and reminds the body how to use what it has wisely stocked away. It is both ancient wisdom and modern science coming together in the most practical, powerful way. Clinical medicine doesn't move on slogans, it moves on outcomes, A1C, medication load, remission. When you look at the best modern studies through that lens, fasting isn't just a theory, it's a clinical tool with measurable advantages. In a randomized, controlled trial published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, adults with type 2 diabetes followed an intermittent calorie-restricted regimen for 3 months and were tracked for a full year. Nearly half, 47.2%, achieved diabetes remission by the study's consensus definition. It's A1C 6.5% for 3 months off all diabetes medications. At 12 months, 40.4% remained in remission. Weight dropped by about 6 kilograms on average, and medication costs fell by roughly 77%. Put simply, fewer drugs, lower A1C, and sustained remission, outcomes standard care rarely matches. Shorter-term trials also show that intermittent fasting can outperform first-line drugs on key markers. In a 405-person randomized clinical trial, a 5-2 intermittent fasting plan with meal replacements produced larger 16-week reductions in A1C and greater weight loss than metformin or empagliflozin, both widely prescribed medications for early type 2 diabetes. The fasting group's A1C fell the most, and average weight loss was about 9-10 kgs, exceeding the drug groups by roughly 4 kg. These are head-to-head data in newly diagnosed patients, precisely where guidelines often default to medication first. Not every fasting pattern is identical, and that's useful clinically. Time-restricted eating tier Eve, eating within a daily window, has been tested in people with type 2 diabetes. In a 6-month randomized trial, TRE led to greater weight loss than standard calorie restriction, with similar A1C improvements across groups. That tells you two things. First, tightening the eating window is at least as effective as the traditional eat less daily advice. Second, when weight falls, A1C tends to follow, consistent with the insulin lowering physiology we expect from fasting. Zooming out to the evidence synthesis level, recent systematic reviews and meta-analysis report that intermittent fasting strategies, including TRE and intermittent energy restriction, lower A1C, fasting glucose, body weight, and LDL in people with type 2 diabetes over the short term, while authors routinely call for longer follow-up. And the signal is consistent. Fasting regimens improve glycemic control and reduce the need for medication in many patients. If you want evidence that fasting can de-prescribe insulin, not just pills, there are published clinical case series of insulin-treated patients using structured fasting 24-hour regimens, repeated weekly, who were able to discontinue insulin while maintaining blood sugar control alongside weight and A1C improvements. Case series aren't randomized trials, but they demonstrate feasibility and safety under supervision. Patients lowered insulin because insulin requirements actually fell. That is precisely what you expect when you remove the constant dietary signal to store energy. Where does this leave standard care? Traditional escalation, more medications, and eventually more insulin, does bring down glucose readings, but at the cost of higher circulating insulin and weight gain for many people. That combination entrenches insulin resistance and makes drug doses creep upward over time. The trials above highlight a different path. Lower insulin by lowering meal frequency or total intake intermittently allows stored energy to be used to lose weight and watch A1C fall with fewer drugs. In the intermittent calorie restriction RCT, the contrast with usual dietary advice was stark. Remission in roughly half of the fasting group versus about 3% in controls. That's not a marginal difference, it's a different category of clinical outcome. A practical point for clinicians and patients is safety and fit. The literature supports several evidence based on ramps of 5-2 intermittent restriction for those who like clear on-off days, daily TRE for those who prefer routine, or supervised 24-hour fasts in selected medicated patients with close monitoring. Across designs, the common mechanism is the same. Periods without food allow insulin to fall, which opens access to stored energy, reduces hepatic fat, improves insulin sensitivity, and translates into lower A1C and fewer drugs. The exact schedule can be individualized, but the direction of travel is consistent from medication, heavy glucose suppression toward insulin, light metabolic remission, backed by peer-reviewed data. Clinically, that's what matters most, not a philosophy, but a reproducible pattern of results: less medication, lower A1C, significant weight loss, and for a meaningful subset, remission that persists beyond the intervention period. Fasting earns a place in the toolkit because it delivers those outcomes, not because it's fashionable. One of the most overlooked strengths of fasting is its practicality. Unlike complicated diet plans that require special foods, apps, or constant tracking, fasting doesn't cost anything. You don't need to buy meal replacements, expensive supplements, or pre-packaged snacks. You simply don't eat for a defined period of time. That simplicity is powerful. For many patients, the sheer relief of not having to micromanage every bite of food is liberating. Instead of obsessing over calories or portion sizes, the focus shifts to when you eat. Flexibility is another advantage. Fasting is not tied to a particular cuisine, cultural tradition, or rigid menu. A vegetarian in India, a meat eater in Texas, and someone eating Mediterranean style in Greece can all incorporate fasting without changing the core of what they eat. That makes it adaptable across cultures and lifestyles. Some people prefer daily time restricted eating, where they eat all their meals within a set window. Others do alternate day fasting or the 5-2 approach, where 2 days a week are lower intake. The method can bend to fit the person, not the other way around. Time savings add another layer of practicality. Preparing, eating, and cleaning up 3 to 6 meals per day takes effort. Cutting out even one meal means less cooking, less planning, and less time spent worrying about food. Many people discover that fasting frees up mental and physical energy that was previously tied up in eating routines. It is one of the rare health interventions that actually gives time back rather than taking more away. A common objection is that people won't stick to it, but real-world adherence data and patient experiences say otherwise. Many who have struggled for years with calorie counting or low-fat diets find fasting easier to sustain. It's less about constant restriction and more about rhythm. Hunger often diminishes after the first adjustment period, because once insulin levels fall and fat burning activates, the body is no longer constantly demanding external fuel. Patients frequently report that their appetite naturally decreases, making it easier to maintain the pattern. Looking at history helps explain why fasting feels natural once the body adjusts. For most of human existence, food was not available around the clock. Our ancestors did not wake up to breakfast cereal, snack through the day, and finish with late night takeout. Meals were consumed when food was available, which often meant long stretches without eating. The human body evolved with these cycles of feast and famine. That's why when we fast, our physiology knows exactly what to do: burn stored energy. Cultural and religious traditions also provide countless examples. Muslims fast daily during Ramadan, abstaining from food and drink during daylight hours for a month each year. Millions of people around the world follow this practice safely. Christians, Jews, Buddhists, and Hindus all have fasting traditions that stretch back centuries. These practices were not designed as health fads, but as spiritual disciplines. Yet the fact that entire cultures have fasted regularly demonstrates its safety and normalcy. It is a shared human pattern, not an odd exception. Another practical benefit is that fasting pairs seamlessly with other diets. People who want to eat low-carb, plant-based, keto, or paleo can all layer fasting onto their chosen way of eating. It is not mutually exclusive with any nutritional philosophy. In fact, fasting often enhances the benefits of whichever diet someone is already following, because it adds the hormonal reset of lowering insulin. It's less about micromanaging food choices and more about creating space for the body to heal. The simplicity also makes fasting more sustainable in environments where ultra-processed foods dominate. Instead of trying to navigate a supermarket full of deceptive packaging and marketing claims, fasting sidesteps the problem altogether. Skipping meals removes the decision-making stress that often leads people to make poor choices under pressure. For busy people with work, family, and financial constraints, this reduction in complexity can be the difference between success and failure. The bottom line is that fasting works in real life because it is simple, flexible, and free. It does not require perfection, just consistency. People don't need to count every calorie, buy expensive products, or give up foods they enjoy. They only need to create space between meals, letting their body naturally lower insulin and tap into stored energy. That is why patients who once believed they could never lose weight or control their diabetes often succeed with fasting. It is not a fad. It is a return to a pattern that is as old as humanity itself. It fits into life rather than taking life over, which is why it endures where so many modern diets fail. Human beings were never designed to eat from sunrise to midnight every single day without pause. For most of history, food came in waves. There were times of abundance, the feast, and there were times of scarcity, the fast. Our bodies are built for this rhythm. When food is available, insulin rises and energy is stored away. When food is absent, insulin falls and stored energy is released. This cycle kept our ancestors lean, healthy, and metabolically flexible. What has changed is not our biology, but our environment. Food is now available at every corner, every hour, and the cultural push to graze constantly has locked us into the feeding side of the cycle, while the fasting side has all but disappeared. The simple logic could not be clearer. Eating and fasting are two sides of the same coin. To only ever eat without fasting is like inhaling without exhaling. The body is left off balance, suffocating under the weight of continuous insulin signaling. Obesity and type 2 diabetes are not diseases of too little food or too little medication. They are diseases of energy imbalance. Too much stored, not enough released. Intermittent fasting restores balance by reintroducing the other half of the cycle, the period of burning what has already been stored. Modern medicine often frames fasting as radical, but in truth, it is the most natural intervention possible. Every single night when you sleep, you fast. Extending that fasting window by skipping a meal or tightening the eating period simply allows the body to do what it has always done: lower insulin, release stored fat, and heal. Far from dangerous, this is the design. The danger lies in never letting insulin fall, in never giving the body a break from storage mode. What makes fasting life-saving for people with obesity and type 2 diabetes is that it addresses the root cause rather than chasing the symptoms. Lower insulin means fat is unlocked, weight comes down, blood sugar stabilizes, and insulin resistance begins to reverse. Medications treat numbers on a lab test, but fasting changes the trajectory of the disease itself. Patients who were resigned to a lifetime of injections and complications discover that their condition can move in the opposite direction, toward remission, health, and freedom. Doctors, too, must see this bigger picture. Prescribing more insulin may be easy, but it perpetuates the problem. Teaching patients how to safely fast, how to reintroduce the natural cycle of eating and not eating, is both safer and more effective. It empowers rather than traps. It is not a fringe idea. It is physiology backed by both ancient practice and modern clinical evidence. The beauty of fasting lies in its universality. It doesn't matter what culture you come from, what foods you enjoy, or what diet you follow. The principle remains: when you eat, you store; when you fast, you burn. That rhythm is as fundamental as the rising and setting of the sun. It is hardwired into every human body. By restoring it, we restore health. The message for patients is hopeful your body is not broken. It still knows how to burn fat, lower insulin, and heal itself. You simply need to give it the opportunity. The message for doctors is urgent. Stop ignoring the other half of the cycle. Fasting is not starvation. It is not reckless. It is a tool as old as humanity, supported by science and desperately needed in a world drowning in metabolic disease. Bringing back the feast-fast cycle is not about perfection, but about rhythm, balance, and giving the body space to work as intended. It costs nothing, requires no special equipment, and carries benefits that no pill can match. The path forward is not more complexity, but more simplicity. When you eat, you store. When you fast, you burn. This is the natural order, and restoring it may be the most powerful step we can take to turn the tide on obesity and type 2 diabetes.